Atlas hit the pavement hard, his yelp cutting through the Greenwich afternoon like a knife through silk. Laurel Mathis watched her German shepherd skid across the concrete, pain and confusion in his eyes, and something inside her shattered. She reached toward him, her wheelchair lurching forward, but designer shoes blocked her pata. 3 of them. Scarlett Scott stood closest, his Italian leather still raised from the kick, a smile spreading across his face like poison. "Stay down, cripple," he said. "This is between your daddy and people who matter." The street had gone silent. Not the peaceful silence of wealth and privilege that usually defined this corner of Connecticut. This was the silence of held breath, of witnesses who knew better than to interfere, of a neighborhood that had learned to look away when power flexed its muscles. But the man in the custom sedan 2 blocks away hadn't learned to look away. He had built an empire on seeing everything. Zayden the Blade Bautista wasn't supposed to be on this street. He had business across town, meetings that couldn't wait, territories that demanded his attention. But something had pulled him this direction. Instinct, coincidence, fate, whatever you wanted to call the invisible hand that sometimes pushed the universe toward collision. And then he saw it. The kick. The dog skidding. The woman in the wheelchair reaching desperately toward her fallen companion, while 3 men in suits laughed like they'd just told the funniest joke in the world. What happened next would become legend. Not because Zayden the Blade Bautista showed mercy. Mercy had died in him long ago, during a decade of war that left bodies from Hartford to Providence. Not because he was some hero riding in to save the helpless. Heroes didn't build empires on fear and blood money. No, what happened next became legend, because it proved something every criminal in Connecticut had forgotten. That the old monsters were still the most dangerous, and some lines should never be crossed, no matter how expensive your suit or how bold your organization. Stay with me until the end, because what Zayden does next will rewrite every rule in the criminal underworld. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. Greenwich, Connecticut, existed in 2 worlds simultaneously. In one world, hedge fund managers jogged past colonial homes worth 8 figures. Charity galas filled ballrooms with champagne and careful smiles. Private schools cultivated the next generation of America's elite behind wrought iron gates and security systems that cost more than most people's houses. But in the other world, the one that operated in the spaces between manicured lawns and behind closed doors, Greenwich was a chessboard, and every piece on that board belonged to someone dangerous. Laurel Mathis lived in both worlds, though she belonged fully to neither. At 26, she moved through Greenwich's pristine streets with the kind of awareness that came from growing up in the shadow of power most people couldn't imagine. Her wheelchair was custom-built, lightweight titanium that cost $40,000 and could navigate terrain that would stop cheaper models cold. Her red sweater was designer but practical. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that suggested she'd stopped caring what people thought about her appearance somewhere around her 16th birthday. And Atlas, her German shepherd, her guardian, her best friend for the past 8 years, walked beside her with the trained vigilance of a dog who understood that the world was full of threats his human couldn't always see coming. Today was Tuesday, which meant Laurel was returning from her weekly physical therapy appointment. The session had been brutal, pushing muscles that still remembered the accident that had changed everything when she was 17. Her mother's sedan, the drunk driver. The moment when her entire world compressed into screaming metal and then expanded into a hospital room where doctors carefully explained that she'd never walk again. Her father, Octavian Mathis, though few people knew that name anymore, had handled the aftermath the only way he knew how. With money, with rage, and eventually with the kind of cold calculation that had defined his entire criminal career. The drunk driver had gone to prison. The prison had experienced a tragic incident, and Octavian had walked away from the empire he'd built across 3 decades, choosing his daughter's recovery over the territories that had consumed his life. But empires don't just disappear because one man walks away. Octavian's absence had created a vacuum, and Zayden Bautista had filled it with brutal efficiency. The 2 men had come to an arrangement, a truce written in silence and sealed with the understanding that both were tired of bloodshed. Octavian would stay retired. Zayden would leave him alone. And everyone could pretend that the decade-long war that had reshaped Connecticut's criminal landscape had never happened. It had worked, mostly, until today. Laurel turned onto her street, Atlas keeping pace beside her when she felt it, that prickling awareness that meant someone was watching. She'd developed that sense growing up, learned to read the subtle shifts in her environment that meant danger was close. The black SUV that had been parked 3 houses down was empty now. The 3 men in designer suits were walking toward her with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. She recognized the type immediately. New generation. Probably early 30s, probably trying to make names for themselves. Probably operating under the protection of an organization that thought the old rules didn't apply anymore. Scarlett Scott, Jay Russo, and Joel Mays had been briefed on their target. Octavian Mathis's daughter. Disabled. Protected only by a dog. Isolated. Perfect way to send a message that the old man's retirement didn't mean his family was untouchable. What they hadn't been briefed on was what would happen if someone else was watching. "Laurel Mathis," Scarlett said as they closed the distance. His navy suit was impeccable. His shoes cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his smile carried the kind of cruelty that came naturally to men who confused violence with power. "Your daddy owes some people a conversation," Atlas growled, low and threatening. The German shepherd positioned himself between Laurel and the approaching men, every muscle tensed, every instinct screaming danger. "My father doesn't owe anyone anything," Laurel said, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to coil in her chest. "He's retired. Everyone knows that." "Retired?" Jay Russo laughed, flanking to the left. His tailored gray suit and slicked-back hair gave him the appearance of a corporate executive rather than an enforcer. "Nobody retires from our world, sweetheart. You just wait for permission to die." They were circling now, testing boundaries, watching how she'd react. Laurel had been in situations like this before, not often, but enough to know that showing fear would only make them bolder. She kept her hands steady on her wheelchair, kept her eyes level, kept her voice calm. "Whatever message you're trying to send, you're sending it to the wrong person. I'm not involved in my father's business. I never was." "That's the beautiful thing," Joel Mays said, completing the circle behind her. His charcoal suit and expensive watch caught the afternoon sunlight. "You don't have to be involved. You just have to deliver the message that we can reach him whenever we want. Through you." Atlas's growl deepened, his hackles rising. The dog had been trained to protect Laurel from all threats, and these 3 men registered as the most immediate danger he'd encountered in years. "Call off your mutt," Scarlett said, his voice hardening, "before this gets ugly." "He's not a mutt," Laurel replied. "And he's not going anywhere." That's when Scarlett Scott made the decision that would change everything. Maybe he was frustrated by her defiance. Maybe he was showing off for his companions. Maybe he genuinely believed that kicking a disabled woman's service dog would send the kind of message his organization wanted sent. Whatever his reasoning, he wound up and drove his expensive Italian leather shoe into Atlas's ribs with enough force to send the German shepherd skidding across the pavement. The yelp that followed wasn't just sound. It was a violation of something fundamental, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Laurel lunged forward in her wheelchair, reaching desperately toward her fallen companion, but Jay Russo's hand clamped down on her shoulder, holding her in place. "See how easy that was?" Scarlett said, admiring his handiwork. "Tell Daddy that next time, it won't be the dog." Atlas struggled to his feet, limping, confused, looking to Laurel for guidance on whether to attack or retreat. Blood spotted the pavement where he'd hit the concrete. His breathing came hard and painful. And that's when they heard it. The roar of an engine, pushed far beyond reasonable speed limits, cutting through the quiet Greenwich afternoon like a chainsaw through peace itself. The custom sedan, midnight black with chrome that caught the sun like knives, appeared at the end of the street, accelerating toward them with the kind of reckless precision that suggested the driver was either insane or completely in control. Scarlett, Jay, and Joel turned, their predatory confidence flickering as professional instinct recognized something wrong about this approaching vehicle. The sedan slid to a stop 10 feet away, tires screaming, leaving black marks on the pristine street that would take weeks to pressure wash away. The driver's door opened before the car had fully stopped, and what emerged redefined every assumption the three enforcers had made about how this afternoon would unfold. Zayden, the Blade Bautista, stood 6'2" and moved like violence given human form. His torso was bare, revealing a landscape of scars and tattoos that told stories of wars fought and won. His tailored black trousers and Italian leather belt suggested wealth, but the muscles beneath sun-darkened skin spoke to something older and more dangerous than money could buy. Gold chains hung from his neck, catching light like promises of pain. His face was angular and hard, weathered by 42 years of life lived on the edge of death. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jawline, a souvenir from Octavian Mathis during their final confrontation a decade ago. His eyes were dark and absolutely empty of anything resembling mercy or hesitation. This was the man who had fought a decade-long war against Connecticut's most dangerous criminal. This was the legend who had built an empire on the ashes of rival organizations. This was the Blade, so named not because he used knives, but because his precision in eliminating threats was surgical. And he had just watched 3 well-dressed idiots kick a disabled woman's dog. Scarlett Scott opened his mouth to say something, maybe to threaten, maybe to negotiate, maybe to establish that this wasn't Zayden's business. He never got the chance. Zayden moved. What Zayden does to these 3 men will become the stuff of legend. But only if you're still here to witness it. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to explode in ways you won't see coming. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's continue. Greenwich mornings tasted like old money and new secrets. Laurel Mathis navigated the pristine sidewalks with practiced efficiency, her wheelchair gliding past colonial homes where fortunes were managed and futures were bought. Atlas walked beside her, his German Shepherd instincts cataloging every shadow, every passing car, every shift in the perfectly manicured landscape. To outsiders, this neighborhood was simply wealthy. Hedge fund managers in running gear, stay-at-home mothers piloting Range Rovers toward Whole Foods, teenagers in private school uniforms waiting for drivers who earned more than most teachers. But Laurel knew better. She'd grown up reading the language spoken in lingering glances and cars that slowed just slightly when passing her street. The gray sedan that appeared every Tuesday wasn't lost. It was checking territory. The landscaping crew that worked Thursdays carried equipment too expensive for their supposed business model. Even the postal worker who delivered mail with military precision wasn't quite what he seemed. Greenwich existed in 2 economies. One dealt in stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. The other dealt in territories and silence and the kind of power that never appeared on tax returns. Her father had taught her to see both worlds before the accident that put her in this chair. Octavian Mathis had retired from the criminal empire he'd built, trading territories for his daughter's safety, blood money for physical therapy sessions that never quite delivered the miracles she'd stopped hoping for. But retirement in their world was more negotiation than escape. Zayden Bautista controlled everything her father had surrendered, maintaining an uneasy truce written in unspoken agreements. Stay away from each other's lives. Pretend the decade of violence never happened. Let the bodies stay buried where they'd fallen. It had worked well enough, until ambitious men in designer suits decided some agreements were worth testing. And some daughters were fair game for proving points. Scarlett Scott checked his Rolex as they approached the target's street. 42 minutes ahead of schedule. Plenty of time to deliver the message and make their afternoon meeting with the Colombians. This job was simple. Scare the crippled girl. Remind her daddy that retirement didn't mean immunity. Prove to their organization that the new generation understood how power really worked. Remember, he told Jay and Joel as they rounded the corner, we're sending a message, not starting a war. Rough her up just enough to make Octavian remember he's got vulnerabilities. Jay Russo straightened his gray suit and smiled. At 31, he'd spent his 20s watching Scorsese films and reading about the old days when men like Octavian Mathis controlled entire cities. But those dinosaurs were extinct now, replaced by professionals who understood that violence was just another business tool. The wheelchair makes it perfect, Joel Mays added, adjusting his Patek Philippe. What's the old man gonna do? Come out of retirement to avenge his crippled daughter? He'll take the message and keep his head down. They'd done their research. Laurel Mathis lived alone in a house Octavian had bought after the accident. No security beyond a dog. No bodyguards. No protection beyond her father's fading reputation. She was isolated, vulnerable, and perfect for demonstrating that the old agreements meant nothing to organizations hungry for expansion. Scarlett had grown up idolizing men like Octavian and Zayden, studying their wars like military history. But that generation had grown soft, trading territories for peace, choosing retirement over dominance. The world belonged to hungrier men now, men willing to cross lines the legends had drawn decades ago. They spotted her ahead, red sweater bright against Greenwich's muted palette, wheelchair moving with practiced efficiency while her German shepherd kept pace. Isolated, undefended. Exactly as promised. Scarlett smiled. This would be easier than expected. Atlas sensed them before Laurel did, his ears flattening as the three men closed distance with predatory synchronization. Laurel's hands tightened on her wheels, calculating escape routes that didn't exist on a street lined with homes whose owners had learned not to interfere. Laurel Mathis. Scarlett's voice dripped false sympathy. Daddy's little broken princess, all alone without her protector. Leave. Her voice stayed level despite fear coiling in her chest. Whatever message you think you're sending, you're making a mistake. Jay circled left, admiring his reflection in a parked Mercedes. The mistake was your father thinking he could just walk away. Nobody retires from our world, sweetheart. Atlas positioned himself between Laurel and Scarlett, a low growl vibrating through his chest. 8 years of training had prepared him for this moment. Protect Laurel at any cost. Cute dog. Scarlett studied Atlas with theatrical interest. Wonder how tough he really is. Don't, Laurel started. Scarlett's Italian leather shoe connected with Atlas's ribs before she could finish. The impact lifted the German shepherd off his feet and sent him skidding across concrete, his yelp of pain and confusion shattering the Greenwich afternoon like breaking glass. Laurel lunged forward, wheelchair jerking toward her fallen companion, but Joel's hand clamped her shoulder, holding her in place with casual cruelty. Easy there. Joel laughed. Don't want you hurting yourself. Atlas struggled upright, limping, blood spotting the pavement where he'd landed. His eyes found Laurel's, seeking guidance, trembling with pain and rage he'd been trained never to release without her command. "See how easy that was?" Scarlett admired his handiwork. "Tell Daddy next time we won't stop with the dog." Jay and Joel's laughter echoed off million-dollar homes, whose windows remained carefully closed. Then they heard the engine. The roar cut through Greenwich's cultivated silence like a chainsaw through silk, midnight black with chrome that caught sunlight like knives. The custom sedan appeared at the street's end, accelerating with reckless precision that suggested its driver had stopped caring about consequences years ago. Scarlett, Jay, and Joel turned, their predatory confidence flickering as professional instinct recognized something wrong about this approaching vehicle. The sedan slid to a halt 10 feet away, tires screaming, leaving black marks on pristine pavement. The driver's door opened before the car fully stopped, and what emerged redefined every assumption the three enforcers had made about how this afternoon would end. Zayden, the Blade Bautista, stood shirtless, his torso a canvas of scars and tattoos documenting wars fought across a decade. Tailored black trousers and Italian leather belt spoke to wealth, but the muscles beneath sun-darkened skin promised something older and more dangerous than money could buy. Gold chains caught light like threats made manifest. His face was angular, weathered by 42 years lived on death's edge. A scar ran from eyebrow to jawline, Octavian's parting gift during their final confrontation. His eyes held nothing resembling mercy or negotiation. This was the man who'd fought Octavian Matthias to a standstill. This was the legend who'd built an empire on rival organizations' ashes. This was the Blade, named not for weapons, but for surgical precision in eliminating threats. And he'd just watched 3 idiots kick a disabled woman's dog. Scarlett found his voice, a tempting bravado. "This doesn't concern—" Zayden moved. No words, no warnings, no theatrical speeches about respect or territory or consequences. Pure action. His fist connected with Scarlett's jaw with bone-breaking force, the impact lifting the enforcer off his expensive shoes and sending him crashing into a parked Lexus hard enough to trigger its alarm. The war had come home. Scarlett hit the Lexus and crumpled, his navy suit torn, blood streaming from his shattered nose. Zayden followed with mechanical efficiency, each movement precise and devastatingly effective. He grabbed Scarlett by his expensive collar and drove a knee into ribs that cracked audibly. "The dog," Zayden said quietly, his voice colder than any scream. "That was your mistake." Jay Russo lunged from the left, reaching for the gun beneath his gray suit. Zayden's elbow caught him in the throat mid-draw, collapsing his windpipe. Jay dropped, gasping, clawing at his neck as his weapon clattered uselessly across pavement. Joel Mays chose flight over fight, spinning toward his black SUV parked 3 houses down. He made it maybe 6 steps before Zayden caught him, one hand gripping the back of his charcoal suit, the other driving his face into a brick mailbox with enough force to shatter both the mailbox and Joel's facial structure. Greenwich windows remained carefully closed. No one called police. No one emerged to intervene. Neighbors who paid 7 figures for their homes had learned long ago that some violence was simply witnessed and forgotten. Zayden returned to Scarlett, who was attempting to crawl away, leaving blood trails on the pristine sidewalk. The Blade knelt beside him, grabbing the hand that had kicked Atlas and bending fingers backward until they snapped like kindling. "You don't touch what belongs to Octavian," Zayden said, his voice carrying no emotion, just cold fact. "And you sure as hell don't kick dogs on my streets." Atlas limped to Laurel's side, whimpering but alive. She held him close, watching in stunned silence as Zayden systematically destroyed 3 men whose designer suits now hung in tatters, whose faces would need reconstructive surgery, whose reputations died on a Connecticut street. Scarlett's Rolex lay shattered beside him, its hands frozen at 2:47 p.m. the exact moment their organization learned some legends still had teeth. Zayden's rage cooled as he walked toward Laurel, transforming from explosion into something more controlled and infinitely more dangerous. He knelt beside Atlas, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as they probed the dog's ribs, checking for breaks, assessing damage with the practiced care of someone who understood injury intimately. "He'll be sore, but nothing's broken," Zayden said, his voice stripped of the fury that had destroyed 3 men moments earlier. "German shepherds are tougher than they look." Atlas whimpered but didn't pull away, some canine instinct recognizing that this tattooed stranger meant no harm. Laurel watched, her hands still trembling on her wheelchair's armrests, trying to reconcile the brutal violence she'd just witnessed with the gentleness now being shown her companion. Zayden stood slowly, then knelt again, this time beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. His dark eyes studied her face with uncomfortable intensity, cataloging features, making connections, reaching conclusions that shifted the entire landscape of what had just happened. "Tell your father, Octavian," he whispered, his voice carrying weight that went far beyond simple words. "He just bought himself another week of quiet. These mice don't understand the rules of war." Laurel's reaction wasn't gratitude or fear. Her expression held grim acknowledgement. The look of someone who'd always known this moment would come, had just hoped it would come later rather than sooner. "He won't be happy you got involved," she said quietly. "He'll be less happy they targeted you." Zayden's scarred face carried something almost resembling concern. Wars start over less. The implications crashed down between them. 3 thugs had just forced 2 legendary enemies, men who'd fought a decade-long war that left bodies scattered across 3 states, back into contact. The truce that had held through sheer mutual exhaustion now hung by threads cut by Italian leather and arrogant cruelty. History had weight, and Laurel felt it settling on her shoulders like concrete. Sometimes a single moment changes everything. A kicked dog, a broken truce, 2 enemies forced to face each other again. If you're feeling this story, if you understand why some things are worth fighting for, subscribe and become part of this community. Comment below and tell me, have you ever stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? The Zayden-Octavian War had reshaped Connecticut's criminal landscape like an earthquake redraws coastlines. 10 years of violence that consumed younger, hungrier versions of both men. Versions willing to sacrifice everything for dominance, trading blood for territory until the body count demanded attention. Even corrupt officials couldn't ignore. Zayden remembered the Hartford warehouse fire that killed 6 of Octavian's best men. Octavian remembered the Providence ambush that left Zayden with the scar running from eyebrow to jaw. Both remembered the civilian casualties, shopkeepers caught in crossfire, families displaced by turf wars, neighborhoods turned into war zones where children learned to recognize gunfire before they learned multiplication tables. The war might have continued indefinitely. 2 apex predators locked in combat, neither could win. Except tragedy doesn't respect territorial disputes or criminal empires. The drunk driver who killed Octavian's wife and shattered his daughter's spine hadn't cared about gang affiliations or power structures. The accident was random, meaningless, the kind of violence that makes calculated brutality seem almost honest by comparison. Octavian had withdrawn from the criminal world, like a wounded animal seeking darkness. He'd handed territories to Zayden without negotiation, accepted losses without retaliation, chose his daughter's recovery over the empire he'd spent decades building. The once feared legend became a ghost, existing somewhere between Greenwich's wealth and his buried past. The unspoken agreement held through mutual exhaustion. Both men would stay in their lanes. Neither would cross into the other's diminished sphere. The war was over not because either won, but because both had lost too much to continue. But some agreements are written in blood and others in silence. Blood dries. Silence breaks. And three ambitious enforcers in designer suits had just shattered a peace both men had paid everything to maintain. Zayden stood in his downtown office an hour later, staring at city lights while his lieutenants exchanged confused glances behind him. He'd broken his own fundamental rule: never intervene emotionally, never expose weakness, never act without strategic calculation. Yet he'd demolished three enforcers in broad daylight because they'd kicked a dog and threatened a woman in a wheelchair. "Boss," Marco ventured carefully, "people are asking questions. Why risk everything for Octavian's daughter?" "Because some lines don't get crossed." Zayden's voice carried finality that ended discussion. The message spread through Connecticut's underworld with viral efficiency. The Blade had defended Octavian Mathis's daughter. Speculation exploded. Was this reconciliation? A power play? Had the old enemies formed alliance? Was war returning? Scarlett, Jay, and Joel's organizations scrambled into damage control. Their enforcers had attacked the daughter of a legend, under protection of another legend. The strategic nightmare compounded hourly. Laurel made the call she'd been dreading. Her father's voice tired when he answered. "It's done, isn't it?" Octavian said. No greeting, just grim understanding. The peace. Three men. They hurt Atlas. Zayden intervened. Silence stretched. Then, debt creates obligations I thought I'd escaped. He didn't ask for gratitude. No, men like us never do. Octavian's exhale carried decades of exhaustion. But now we're connected again, and every ambitious fool in 3 states will test whether that connection means alliance or renewed war. The negotiation that followed happened through intermediaries, carefully worded messages, neutral meeting grounds proposed and rejected, boundaries redrawn through language both men understood intimately. They weren't friends, would never be friends. But Laurel had become an unexpected bridge between enemies who'd spent decades trying to kill each other. Some debts couldn't be paid with money or territory. Some obligations rewrote rules both men thought were permanent. 6 months later, Greenwich's pristine facade had returned, but everything beneath had shifted like tectonic plates finding new equilibrium. Thursday afternoons brought an impossible tableau. 2 legendary enemies sharing coffee on Laurel's porch, while Atlas dozed between them, the dog who'd somehow come their unofficial mediator. Zayden and Octavian sat in careful choreography, neither fully relaxed, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. They discussed neutral topics: weather, market fluctuations, the Mets' disappointing season, while beneath surface civility ran currents of history neither could forget. But something had cracked in Zayden's armor. He still moved with predatory calculation, still commanded an empire built on fear and precision. Yet he brought Atlas treats in his jacket pocket, asked about Laurel's physical therapy with genuine interest, and occasionally revealed fragments of humanity he'd buried decades ago. "Your daughter accomplished what 10 years of war couldn't," Octavian observed quietly during one meeting, watching Zayden scratch behind Atlas's ears. "She made you remember you're human." Zayden's scarred face carried something approaching a smile. "She reminded me what's worth protecting. Different lesson." Laurel listened from her wheelchair, studying 2 men who'd reshaped Connecticut's criminal landscape through violence, now reduced to uncomfortable peace by circumstances neither had chosen. She hadn't asked to be saved, hadn't asked to become a bridge between enemies. But she'd learned that sometimes the greatest power lies in refusing to choose between strength and compassion, in being vulnerable enough to need protection while fierce enough to demand it on her terms. Atlas stirred, stretching between the 2 men, trusting both despite everything. And that's how a woman in a wheelchair and her loyal dog rewrote the rules of Connecticut's criminal underworld. If this story moved you, if you want more tales of redemption, loyalty, and the power of protecting what matters, subscribe now. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what's the most important thing you'd protect at any cost? Sometimes the most dangerous people need reminding what they're protecting, and sometimes a woman in a wheelchair and her loyal dog are exactly the reminder they need. Not to make them soft, but to make them whole. The war was over, not because either man won, but because a woman and her dog had shown them both what victory actually looked like. Not territory conquered, but worth protecting. Sometimes legends don't end with blood. Sometimes they end with coffee on a porch and a dog sleeping in the sun.